Welcome back. South Africa's past has been long memorialized through the erection of statues paying homage to historical figures and events. Some of these represent subjugation and oppression and have become polarizing in society. It raises the question of the role polarizing statues play in social cohesion and the rebuilding of South Africa. To unpack this, I'm now joined by Dr. Fubah Alubafi, who is a senior research specialist at the HSRC. Doctor, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this morning. Now, earlier this week, we saw the statue of King Shaka being unveiled at the Durban airport. Let's just talk about the historical context behind the prominent statues that exist in South Africa. Which figures do you think are most commonly memorialized, and what do they represent?
Thank you for having me, Katleho. The unveiling of the statue of King Shaka at King Shaka International Airport in Durban is part of an ongoing system of memorialization, which is not unique to South Africa. It's something that is happening globally. Statues and monuments were used as cultural tools in the project of colonialism. In South Africa, they were used during the colonial era, during apartheid, to represent their heroes and heroines. In the same vein, the post-apartheid government seemed to have copied from the apartheid government to continue memorializing their own heroes and heroines using statues and monuments. The statue of King Shaka must be seen within this context, but also those who are being represented are always key figures, key political players in government, key events. So the statues are meant to remember the significant role that they played at their time, either in transforming the society in which they live or in contributing to development. Thank you.
I mean, you're correct, Doc, in saying that this is not unique to South Africa. I mean, we saw earlier in the week the outgoing president of Ghana facing a storm of criticism for also unveiling a self-honoring statue. How do the South African public rather generally feel about the memorialization of historical figures through statues? Are there notable differences in opinion across different demographics?
There are differences in opinion. We saw this during the Rhodes Must Fall movement, where some people were calling for the removal of the statue of Rhodes. Others were arguing that the statue should be left alone. So there's always differences in opinion. Research conducted by the Human Sciences Research Council suggests that when the Rhodes Must Fall movement started in 2015, 34% of the population were of the opinion that the statue should be left alone. 29% were of the opinion that the statue should be removed and kept in museums. 19% said they really didn't care what happened to the statues. 12% were undecided, and some also felt that whatever decision that was taken, or whatever decision that the government had to take at the time, must be a reflection of the views of the majority. So there's always differences in opinion. We've seen recently where the Afrikaners rallied around the Voortrekker monument in Pretoria to protest against the Bella Bella Act. I think that was just recently. And the challenge that we have might be that South Africa seems to be moving along the same system of memorialization that they inherited. Perhaps if the government was able to use statues and monuments to promote national unity in South Africa by coming up with something different from what they inherited, that would have maybe made sense to most of the people in this country, but the government seems to be replicating what they inherited. And as a result, this has been faced with by contestations, arguments from the different factions.
So on that, Doc, in terms of government replicating and not going about this differently, how do you think these statues then contribute to a challenge or challenge the narratives of history that is taught in schools and understood by the public? Are they effective in promoting a nuanced understanding of South Africa's past?
Well, as much as people are opposing, or some people are of the view that statues should be removed from the cultural landscape, but these statues are part of South African history. You cannot separate the past from the present. I think the past and the present are inseparable. So removing these statues, in my opinion, will seem as if South Africa is trying to destroy the rich and diverse history of the country. Yeah.
So then, Doc, given these controversies surrounding certain statues, I mean, and you're also saying with government continuing to replicate the ways of the past, what alternatives exist for memorializing historical figures and events? How can communities honor their history without perpetuating harmful legacies?
I think one of the recommendations which we made in the research that was conducted at the HSRC was that government should consider an African way of memorialization. Government should consider an African way of memorialization. How were Africans remembering their heroes and heroines before colonialism? Because the story of South Africa shows that statues started with the dawn of colonialism in South Africa. So the statues that we find on the streets, beginning with a Paul Kruger statue constructed in 1896, the Union Building after the South African War of 1910 to 1913. I think that's how far back the history of statues can be traced. So, but coming up in 1994, one would expect that the post-apartheid government should come up with a new form of memorialization rather than just replicating how were Africans memorializing their heroes and heroines before 1994. Perhaps if a hero is coming from the Venda, how were Venda people memorializing their heroes and heroines before 1994? Government should take that into consideration. The Zulu Kingdom, how were they memorializing their heroes and heroines before 1994? So those are some of the cultural practices which we feel the government should revive when it comes to memorialization.
So what you're saying, Doc, in essence, are you saying that recent debates about these statues haven't influenced broader discussions around policy changes related to historical education and the public commemoration in our country?
I think the debates have greatly influenced changes in the curriculum, because I remember the Department of Education came up, revised the history curriculum, and I'm sure the recommendations which the HSRC made are some of the things or some of the issues that were taken up and addressed in the new curriculum. So I feel that the debates are contributing significantly in trying to transform education in South Africa.
And lastly, Doc, I mean, you spoke about how the government should rather look at how Africa was memorializing the history and the people and the figures and the leaders that led them in the past. How do you think South Africa should be doing it in comparison to what other countries are doing? Are there any similar issues that we are facing with other countries that are using different ways of remembering their leaders?
Well, as much as our research suggests that South Africa should consider how Africans were memorializing their heroes and heroines before 1994, but South Africa history is greatly, it's different from that of other African countries in the sense that South Africa is a multiracial country. They talk about a rainbow nation. And for the government to then start following an African way of memorialization and neglecting the other racial groups certainly will still continue to create problems. So what we're suggesting, as I said earlier, is that if it's an Afrikaner hero or heroine, the government should consider how they were memorializing their own heroes and heroines. If it's a Zulu, the government should consider how they were memorializing their own heroes and heroines, and it should apply across the different racial and ethnic groups in South Africa. It might be too much to ask for, but I think those are some of the observations that participants gave us when we conducted the research in 2015, 2018.
So it shouldn't just be a blanket approach, but rather a balancing act that the government needs to do there. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Fubah Alubafi, who is a senior research specialist at the HSRC, speaking to us there about the importance of statues and how we memorialize our heroes and heroines of